Luffy has eaten a devil fruit of a god, strong enough to terrify the world government and defeat the world's strongest creature. But the power of this mythical zone is still a little unclear, and the way Luffy uses it, it's a little out there. So today we're going to be breaking down the abilities of Luffy's devil fruit and talk about some important information from the Road to Laugh Tale that explain Luffy's awakening. But before we get to that, I just need you to do me one favor, which is to hit that subscribe button and join our King Pirates crew, because it really does help the channel and I would really appreciate it. And also thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video, but more on that later. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's get into the breakdown. We're gonna start the discussion with the actual name of Luffy's devil fruit, which is the Hito Hito no Mi model sun god Nika. Now with this bit of information, there's actually two sides to this. There's the historical side and story side that is connected to Joy Boy and freedom and the changing of the name of the devil fruits, but we're not really gonna get into that in this video. Instead, in this video, I wanna fully focus on the powers of this devil fruit, and I think a good place to start is actually the description given by the Gorosei. And according to the Gorosei, this devil fruit has the properties of rubber. It is limited only by the user's imagination, putting smiles on people across the world, and it is the embodiment of the warrior of liberation. Now, there's a lot of information there to break down, but the first thing we should actually focus on is that this devil fruit is connected to rubber. Because not only does that establish consistency with the story, given that Luffy was a rubber man for the entirety of One Piece, but it also explains how Luffy's devil fruit works and that there is a limit. He can't just create anything he wants out of thin air. He does still have to use the properties of rubber to do so. At the same time though, the fruit is still pretty broken, and we don't even have to look at Gear 5th to see this, because just base form Luffy, along with all the other gears that he had, was already incredibly strong. To start off, just the property of rubber allowed him to absorb dull attacks, including all bullets. And as far as his attacks go, all of his original attacks were already a form of creation, because if you looked at all of his named attacks, he drew inspiration from other things. And in comparison, if you look at another character like Kaido, most of his named attacks are like Ragnarok and like inspired by something in mythology. Meanwhile, Luffy is just using his imagination and creating other objects out of his rubber. In fact, I actually think Luffy's powers were perfectly described in chapter 1 when he told Shanks that he's gonna make a punch as strong as a pistol, which really shows how Luffy creates and uses his attacks. He's just drawing inspiration from things like pistols, balloons, and even UFOs, and just recreating it with rubber. Where he elevates his powers to another level is Gear 2nd and Gear 3rd, which I think is the first expansion of his powers. This is where he really surpasses the limits of his own body by also drawing inspiration from CP9 and Giants, and in turn he creates two of the strongest attacks that he had at the time. But it's also important to remember that he did have some drawbacks. Gear 2nd was such a toll on his body that Rob Lucci even said that he was losing lifespan, while Gear 3rd turned him into midget Luffy. So although those were his two strongest attacks, he did have some drawbacks, and I think the reason for that was lack of control and also the fact that he was not yet awakened. We'll talk more about awakening in the next section, but because he wasn't awakened yet, it definitely meant that he could not fully maximize the powers of rubber. So him going into Gear 2nd and Gear 3rd was really pushing the limits of his body, and the only way to solve that was either awakening or later on getting more control so he can use it sparingly. Which then gets us to Gear 4th, his strongest form before awakening, and I think this form was the first signs that Luffy had a mythical zone. Because although the base power of Gear 4th is simply Luffy inflating his muscles and then using Haki with it, I do think when he created Gear 4th, he really started to tap into his mythical zone powers. Because not only did he have a much stronger form, he also physically changed appearances. He had a different hairstyle, his eyes looked different, there was different colors across his body. At the time when it happened, everybody thought it was a little weird, but we kind of just boiled it down to anime logic. But it turns out it actually makes sense, because Luffy is not a paramecia, he's actually a zone user. So him going into Gear 4th, I think, was him better understanding his devil fruits and really starting to tap into some transformations. But of course, even with Gear 4th, it was not perfected, he was not yet awakened, and it still had massive drawbacks of stamina issues. And this is where awakening and Gear 5th come in, but first I want to let you guys know about Skillshare. Because just like Luffy did with his awakening, you can power yourself up with Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of online classes and members across 150 countries, and it's one of the best places to get inspired, learn new skills, whether for a hobby, your business, or a side hustle. With their premium membership, you get access to every single class available on the website, and personally, I've actually taken a ton of Skillshare classes. You see, when I first started growing my YouTube channel, and even to this day, Skillshare is the place where I found a lot of useful classes to grow my skills. In fact, some of the biggest YouTubers have created incredibly helpful classes on Skillshare. For example, Ali Abdaal had a great course called Video Editing with Final Cut Pro X from beginner to YouTuber, YouTuber. It was a very easy to follow class that not only showed beginners how to use Final Cut Pro, but also had tips and shortcuts for more experienced users like myself. So if you want to get started on Skillshare, the first 1,000 people to sign up using my link in the description will get a 1-month free trial on Skillshare. So go click on the link in the description and start your Skillshare journey today. And now back to the video. Moving on though, let's talk about Luffy's awakening, because this is where things get serious. It wasn't until this that the Gorosei got terrified. And although I thought they probably should have done a better job of tracking Luffy if he was really that dangerous, the fact is that when Luffy started to awaken, they were like, oh damn. Because as they explain, when Luffy awakens, it brings him more physical strength and freedom and makes his fruit the most ridiculous power in the world. And to me, based off of that explanation, I think awakening essentially gets rid of the limit Luffy had before and allows him to just freely create anything with rubber to his imagination. So whereas Gear 2nd, Gear 3rd, and Gear 4th all had their drawbacks on his body and stamina, Gear 5th allows him to surpass those physical limits and just go crazy. For example, he can literally just turn into a giant now, expanding his entire body, or expand his fist so much that it's the same size as Onigashima. The physical limiter he had before is now broken, so he now has the freedom to just create anything he wants with rubber. And to help break this down, we actually got a lot of important information from the Road to Laugh Tale that was dropped recently. One big thing that was confirmed in there, which was pretty obvious, which is that Hanuman is a major inspiration for Gear 5th and Luffy's Devil Fruit. And one of the main connections here to pay attention to is that Hanuman's main ability was shape-shifting. And although Luffy's power is not that broken, he's essentially able to do that to an extent with rubber. Whether that's turning his body into a giant, shifting his body to increase strength, or shape-shifting to absorb attacks. And on top of that, the bonus that he has with the properties of rubber is that he's immune to lightning, so he's literally able to use it and grab it at this point. And I'm sure in the future we're gonna see him create even more attacks with fire using friction and speed that he generates from his attacks. And also it's important to remember that he's able to do that because he is a Zoan, and by awakening, his physical stats in terms of durability, speed, and strength are all just boosted. One thing I think that is a little overlooked in Luffy's fight against Kaido is that after he went into Gear 5th, he still took an absolute beating from Kaido, but he was still able to tank all that because of his durability. So his physical abilities in Gear 5th is superb, and we definitely shouldn't overlook that. But perhaps the most interesting part about his Devil Fruit is the mythical part of his Zoan, which seems to give him some very Paramecia-like abilities. Because just like Paramecia awakenings, he's able to straight up affect the environment, making his surroundings into rubber, creating the rubber world that many have speculated. And on top of that, he's able to straight up just apply his powers to other people as well, which was how he was able to just punch straight through Kaido's face, or like put his arms straight through his eyes. And once again, this is another Paramecia awakening power that we recently just saw from Useless Kid when he applied his magnetism to Big Mom. So with all that said, not only does Luffy have the most ridiculous power with all the things that he can create, but he also pretty much has the awakening power of 2 categories of Devil Fruits. And that is just a crazy power if you really think about it, because we haven't even mentioned this man's haki. And at the same time, there are still some drawbacks, and this was another thing that was highlighted in the Road to Laugh Tale, because one thing that was specifically pointed out was the fact that Zoans have a will of their own. This was something mentioned by the Gorosei in their explanation on why they could never get their hands on this mythical Devil Fruit. But where this really matters in regards to Luffy is the drawback, which was highlighted in one of Oda's notes, because he points out in his notes that unlike Paramecia's, there is risk with this mythical Zoan because the innate nature of the fruit starts to take over the user. And when I read this was like a mind-blowing moment for me, because everything just started to make sense. First off, let's talk about the awakened jailer beasts back in Impel Down. Those people weren't even like humans anymore. They could barely speak. They were in their Zoan forms the entire time. We never saw them in their human form, and they were so out of control, I started to think that they might have been experiments and not actually awakened Zoans. But it turns out the actual answer was, once you awaken your Zoan, the will within the fruit starts to take over the body. So that perfectly explained the jailer beast, and this also likely means that Chopper's monster form is his awakening. So him forcing himself into monster point when he didn't have the control was essentially the will of the Devil Fruit taking over, and he was just completely out of control and went berserk. And also applying this logic to Luffy, it explains why he was just laughing like a maniac on crack the whole time anytime he went into Gear 5th. So obviously this is the main drawback of Gear 5th right now, something Luffy has to overcome and really gain control of his body. And that's really the next level for Luffy, fully understanding the powers better, getting full control. Metaphorically, this is really interesting as well, because this fruit is supposed to give you the most freedom, but at the same time you kind of have to fight over control of your body. But yeah, I fully expect this to be the next main development for Luffy. I'm sure there's gonna be a lot more information connected to Joy Boy as well. well. Because another part that's kind of unexplainable right now is the fact that there's always drums playing whenever Luffy goes into Gear 5th. But that topic, along with Joy Boy, I'm gonna save for a future video. If you made it this far into the video, you probably had a good time watching, so please drop a like for the YouTube algorithm. If you don't want to make it easy, in my hand, I have a One Piece volume between 60 and 65. If you guessed it wrong, you have to like, subscribe, and watch the next video. And the answer is 63.